Mark Cuban thought he could embarrass Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on national television. The billionaire Shark Tank star had no idea what was coming next. What happened in the following 30 seconds left the entire panel speechless and may have just changed how America sees political debates forever. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss these incredible political showdowns. The studio glowed with bright lights as the production team made final adjustments. This wasn't just any episode of Shark Tank. This was a groundbreaking special that ABC had been promoting for weeks. Democracy Meets Entrepreneurship was supposed to showcase how political leaders could learn from business innovators. The network executives were thrilled with the concept. They had managed to book some of the most recognizable names in politics and business for what they hoped would be a ratings goldmine. The idea was simple. Let successful entrepreneurs mentor political figures on economic policy, creating must-see television that would appeal to both business and political audiences. Mark Cuban sat in his familiar spot, the 65-year-old Dallas Mavericks owner wearing his signature confident smirk. His net worth of $5.4 billion gave him the kind of swagger that made people listen when he spoke. Tonight, he was ready to show these politicians how real business worked. He had spent the morning reviewing notes about his guest, confident that his decades of business experience would easily overwhelm whatever talking points she might have prepared. The makeup artist had just finished touching up his appearance when Cuban caught sight of his opponent for the evening. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood near the craft services table, reviewing her notes one final time. She looked younger than her 42 years, and Cuban felt his confidence surge even higher. This was going to be easier than he thought. Across from him stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas's 30th District. At 42, the former civil rights lawyer had already made waves in Congress with her sharp questioning and fearless approach to taking on powerful figures. Her natural hair framed her face as she adjusted her navy blazer, preparing for what she thought would be a policy discussion. The other sharks, Kevin O'Leary, Lori Greiner, and Robert Herjavec, watched from their seats, expecting the usual back and forth about investment potential. None of them could predict that they were about to witness one of the most devastating political takedowns in television history. Cuban leaned back in his chair, that familiar cocky grin spreading across his face. He had dealt with thousands of entrepreneurs over the years, watched them crumble under pressure, seen their dreams shatter with a few well-placed words. How hard could it be to handle one congresswoman? He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. To understand the earthquake that was about to hit, you need to know who these two people really are, and why this confrontation mattered so much more than just another television debate. Mark Cuban built his fortune the old-fashioned way, by being ruthless in business and never backing down from a fight. From selling garbage bags door to door as a kid in Pittsburgh to becoming one of America's most recognizable billionaires, Cuban had earned his reputation as someone who said exactly what he thought, consequences be damned. His journey to the top wasn't pretty. He got fired from multiple jobs for insubordination, started companies that failed, and clawed his way up through sheer determination and an ego the size of Texas. When he sold Broadcast.com to Yahoo for $5.7 billion in 1999, Cuban didn't just become rich, he became untouchable. On Shark Tank, Cuban was known for brutal honesty that crushed dreams in seconds. "You're delusional," he'd tell hopeful entrepreneurs. "Your business is worthless. I'm out." Those two words had ended more dreams than most people could count. Cuban thrived on being the smartest person in the room, the one who could spot weakness and exploit it without mercy. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't some nervous entrepreneur with a half-baked business plan. She was a civil rights attorney who had spent her career fighting battles that Cuban couldn't even imagine. Growing up in St. Plate, Louis Crockett learned early that the world wasn't fair, especially if you were a black woman trying to make it in white-dominated spaces. She worked her way through the University of Missouri, then earned her law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. While Cuban was making millions in tech, Crockett was defending people who couldn't defend themselves. As a defense attorney, she went head-to-head with prosecutors, judges, and a justice system that often seemed stacked against her clients. She learned to fight with words as weapons, to find the weak spots in seemingly unbeatable opponents, to turn their own arguments against them with surgical precision. When she ran for Congress in 2022, Crockett brought that same fighting spirit to Washington. She quickly made a name for herself on the House Oversight Committee, where she grilled witnesses with the kind of sharp questioning that made seasoned politicians sweat. Her viral moments came not from rehearsed speeches, but from her ability to think on her feet and expose hypocrisy in real time. During one particularly memorable hearing, she had taken apart a pharmaceutical executive so thoroughly that he had to request a recess to consult with his lawyers. The clip of her systematically dismantling his talking points about drug pricing had gotten over 50 million views across social media platforms. Republicans might have disagreed with her politics, but even they had to admit she knew how to fight. Her staff had been working for weeks to prepare for tonight's appearance. They knew Cuban's history, his investment patterns, his public statements, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. Crockett had insisted on doing her own research, spending hours poring over SEC filings and court documents. "He's going to come at me hard," she had told her communications director. "I need to be ready to hit back harder." What Cuban didn't know was that Crockett had a network of sources throughout the business world, lawyers, investigators, whistleblowers who had been waiting for someone with a platform to expose the truth about powerful figures like him. Tonight, all of that preparation was about to pay off in spectacular fashion. The stakes of tonight's confrontation went far beyond television ratings. Cuban represented everything Crockett had been fighting against her entire career. Wealthy, privileged men who thought their money gave them the right to talk down to anyone they pleased. For Cuban, this was just another chance to show off his intellect and business acumen. For Crockett, this was personal. She had dealt with men like Cuban her entire career. Powerful figures who assumed she was out of her league simply because she didn't look like them. Tonight, she had a national platform to show America what happened when those assumptions met reality. The tension in the studio was already building as producers set up for what they thought would be a routine policy discussion. Cuban adjusted his microphone, that confident smirk never leaving his face. Crockett took a sip of water, her expression calm but her eyes sharp and focused. Neither the cameras nor the other sharks could have predicted that they were about to witness the moment when Mark Cuban's legendary confidence crashed headfirst into Jasmine Crockett's razor-sharp intellect. The explosion was about to begin. The cameras rolled as host Mark Burnett introduced the segment. Tonight, we have a special edition where Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett will present her economic policy proposals to our panel of successful entrepreneurs. Cuban immediately interrupted, his voice cutting through the introduction like a knife. "Hold on, Mark. Before we waste everyone's time here, I need to ask, what exactly qualifies a career politician to talk about real business and economics?" The studio fell silent. This wasn't part of the script. The other sharks exchanged glances, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Crockett's expression didn't change, but her grip on her notes tightened slightly. "I mean, let's be honest here," Cuban continued, his Dallas drawl becoming more pronounced as his confidence grew. "You've spent your whole career in government and law. What do you actually know about creating jobs, building companies, or generating real wealth? Not taxpayer-funded salaries, actual wealth." Kevin O'Leary leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "Mark's got a point. We deal with real entrepreneurs here, people who risk everything to build something from nothing. What's your track record with actual business creation?" Crockett remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes. "Well, Mark, since you asked—" "No, seriously," Cuban interrupted again, his voice gaining edge. "I looked at your background. Lawyer, politician, more politician. Where's the innovation? Where are the companies you've built? The jobs you've created? The real economic impact?" The audience began to murmur. This was getting uncomfortable fast. Lori Greiner shifted in her seat, clearly uneasy with the direction of the conversation. Robert Herjavec looked like he wanted to intervene but wasn't sure how. Cuban wasn't finished. He leaned forward, pointing directly at Crockett. "See? This is what's wrong with politics today. People with zero real-world business experience, making policies that affect actual job creators. You want to talk economics? Show me your PL statements. Show me the companies you've built from scratch." "Mark," Burnett tried to interject, but Cuban was on a roll. "And don't give me some speech about public service," Cuban continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Public service doesn't create wealth. It doesn't innovate. It doesn't solve real problems. It just redistributes other people's money and creates more bureaucracy." The other sharks were now visibly uncomfortable. O'Leary, who usually loved conflict, looked surprised by Cuban's aggressive approach. This wasn't business tough love. This was personal attack territory. "You know what I think?" Cuban said, his smirk growing wider. "I think you're here because someone told you that getting on Shark Tank would be good for your political brand. But you don't actually have anything of substance to offer. No real business acumen, No practical experience, just political talking points. Crockett had remained silent through this entire assault, her expression unreadable. She took another sip of water, set down her notes, and looked directly at Cuban. The cameras caught the moment when something shifted in her posture, subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read body language. "Are you finished?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that made Cuban's confidence waver slightly. "I'm just getting started," Cuban replied, but his voice had lost some of its earlier swagger. Something about her calm demeanor was making him nervous. "Because I have some questions for you too, Mark," Crockett said, her voice still calm but now carrying a steel edge that made everyone in the studio pay attention. "Since we're talking about qualifications and real-world experience." Cuban's smirk faltered for just a moment. "Go ahead," he said, trying to recapture his earlier confidence. "I'm an open book." Crockett smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile a predator shows before striking. "Oh, I'm counting on that." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. The other sharks sensed something was coming but couldn't quite figure out what. Cuban still thought he was in control, but his body language was already betraying him. He shifted in his chair, the confident lean forward becoming a more defensive posture. "See, Mark," Crockett began, her voice taking on the tone she used in congressional hearings when she was about to destroy a witness. "You've been sitting there for the last 5 minutes questioning my credentials, my experience, my right to even be here. But I've been doing my homework on you too." Cuban's face tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Crockett said, her smile growing sharper, "that before you started lecturing me about business experience and real-world impact, you might want to make sure your own house is in order." The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something explosive was about to happen. Cuban's confident smirk was completely gone now, replaced by a wariness that he tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. Crockett reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Because I have some very interesting information about your recent business decisions, Mark, and I think America deserves to know about them before you continue your lecture." Cuban's face went pale. Whatever was on that paper, he clearly wasn't expecting it. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and everyone in the studio could feel the shift in power dynamics happening in real time. The explosion Crockett had been building toward was about to detonate. Cuban tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Look, Jasmine," he said, his voice taking on a condescending tone that made everyone in the studio cringe. "I think you're getting a little emotional here. This is business, not some courtroom drama where you can grandstand for the cameras." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even O'Leary winced at the obvious sexist undertone. Lori Greiner's mouth fell open in shock. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing that Cuban had just made a catastrophic mistake. Crockett's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. She had been planning to destroy Cuban methodically, professionally, but now he had given her permission to go nuclear. "Emotional?" she repeated slowly, her voice deadly quiet. "Mark, the only emotion I'm feeling right now is satisfaction. Because you just proved everything I'm about to expose about you." Jasmine Crockett held the paper in her hand like a loaded weapon, her eyes never leaving Mark Cuban's increasingly uncomfortable face. The billionaire who had spent the last several minutes demolishing her credentials was about to learn what happened when you challenged someone who actually knew how to fight back. "You want to talk about business experience, Mark?" Crockett began, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had cross-examined hostile witnesses for years. "Let's start with your most recent venture, the one you've been very quiet about." Cuban's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Crockett's eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Because according to SEC filings from just 3 months ago, you invested $50 million in a cryptocurrency platform called CryptoGuard. Ring any bells?" The color drained from Cuban's face. The other sharks leaned forward, suddenly very interested in where this was going. O'Leary's eyes lit up with the kind of predatory interest usually reserved for failed entrepreneurs. That's a private investment," Cuban stammered, his usual confidence completely evaporating. "A private investment that went bankrupt in 6 weeks," Crockett continued, her voice cutting through his weak protest like a scalpel. "Wiping out not just your $50 million, but the life savings of over 10,000 ordinary investors who trusted the platform because they saw your name attached to it." The studio erupted in gasps. Camera operators zoomed in on Cuban's face, capturing every micro-expression as his carefully constructed image began crumbling in real time. "But that's not the best part," Crockett continued, clearly enjoying herself now. The best part is that you pulled your money out 2 days before the platform collapsed. 2 days, Mark. Almost like you knew something the regular investors didn't. Cuban shot up from his chair, his face flushed red. That's completely out of line. Those are private business matters. Private? Crockett's voice rose for the first time, but it was controlled, prosecutorial. Tell that to Maria Gonzalez from San Antonio, who lost her daughter's college fund because she trusted your judgment. Tell that to James Wilson from Detroit, who mortgaged his house because he believed in a platform that had Mark Cuban's endorsement. The other sharks were now staring at Cuban in shock. Lori Greiner covered her mouth with her hand. Robert Herjavec leaned back in his chair as if trying to distance himself from the fallout. Even O'Leary, who thrived on financial ruthlessness, looked uncomfortable. You want to lecture me about real-world impact? Crockett continued, standing up now, her voice gaining power with each word. Let's talk about real-world impact. While I was defending people who couldn't afford lawyers, you were making investment decisions that destroyed families. While I was fighting for criminal justice reform, you were busy covering your tracks on failed ventures. Cuban tried to recover, his voice weak and defensive. That's not how business works. There are risks involved in any investment. Risks for other people, apparently. Crockett cut him off. Because somehow you managed to avoid those risks, didn't you? Somehow you got out just in time while everyone else got burned. She pulled out another sheet of paper, and Cuban visibly flinched. Should we talk about your real estate ventures in South Dallas? The ones where you promised to revitalize low-income neighborhoods but ended up displacing hundreds of families when the projects failed? Stop, Cuban said quietly, but his voice carried no authority anymore. Or maybe we should discuss your employment practices at the Mavericks, Crockett continued relentlessly. Specifically, the gender pay gap that led to a $10 million settlement that you tried very hard to keep quiet. The studio was completely silent except for Crockett's voice, which had taken on the rhythm of a closing argument designed to destroy an opponent completely. You see, Mark, she said, walking closer to his chair, you spent the last 10 minutes questioning my credentials because I haven't built companies or created what you call real wealth. But what you call real wealth, I call exploitation. What you call business acumen, I call knowing the right people and having enough money to buy your way out of consequences. Cuban slumped back into his chair, all fight gone out of him. The transformation was complete, from predator to prey in the span of minutes. You want to know about my qualifications? Crockett's voice was now commanding the entire studio. I've spent my career fighting people exactly like you. Rich, powerful men who think their money gives them the right to destroy other people's lives without consequences. I've made a career out of holding people like you accountable. She turned to address the cameras directly, her presence now dominating the entire set. And unlike your business ventures, my track record is public. Every case I've won, every family I've helped, every corrupt system I've exposed, it's all documented. Because that's what real public service looks like. The other sharks were now looking at Cuban with a mixture of shock and disgust. O'Leary, who had started the segment supporting Cuban's attack, was shaking his head. Lori Greiner was staring at Cuban like she'd never seen him before. So, before you lecture any more public servants about qualifications, Crockett concluded, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet tone, maybe you should ask yourself this question. When your business legacy is built on other people's losses, what exactly are you qualified to teach anyone? Cuban opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in Shark Tank history, Mark Cuban, the man who had crushed thousands of dreams with casual cruelty, had been completely and utterly silenced. The cameras captured it all. His flushed face, his trembling hands, his complete inability to mount any kind of defense. The billionaire who had walked into the studio thinking he would embarrass a congresswoman had instead been exposed as exactly the kind of person Jasmine Crockett had built her career fighting against. The shark had been eaten alive on national television, and everyone in America was watching. But Cuban wasn't finished making mistakes. As the reality of his situation sank in, his desperation led to one final fatal error. He pointed a shaking finger at Crockett and said, "You think you're so smart, but you're just another angry politician looking for headlines. This whole thing is probably some publicity stunt for your next campaign." The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Cuban had just accused a sitting congresswoman of staging an elaborate hoax on national television, effectively calling her a liar in front of millions of viewers. Crockett's smile turned predatory. "A publicity stunt, Mark? Is that what you think this is?" She reached into her folder one more time and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Because I was saving this for later, but since you want to keep digging," Cuban's face went from red to pale gray in seconds. Whatever was in that envelope, his reaction made it clear that it was his worst nightmare come true. "This," Crockett said, holding up the envelope, "contains communications between you and CryptoGuard executives from the week before the platform collapsed. Internal emails where you specifically discussed exit strategies and damage control. Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you prefer to keep calling this a publicity stunt?" Cuban's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No sound came out. The man who had built his reputation on never backing down from a fight had been completely and utterly broken. The immediate aftermath in the ABC studio was unlike anything in the show's 15-year history. Mark Cuban sat in his chair, staring at the table. His usual swagger completely evaporated. The man who had never been at a loss for words couldn't find a single thing to say in his own defense. Host Mark Burnett tried to restore some semblance of normalcy. "Well, that was unexpected. Mark, do you want to respond to the Congresswoman's points?" Cuban looked up slowly, his face still flushed, and managed only, "I think we're done here." His voice was barely above a whisper, a shocking contrast to the booming confidence he'd displayed just minutes earlier. Kevin O'Leary, who had initially supported Cuban's attack, was now backpedaling furiously. "You know, Jasmine, I have to say, those are some very serious allegations. If they're true, they're all documented," Crockett replied calmly, gathering her papers. "SEC filings, court records, settlement agreements. Unlike some people's business claims, mine come with receipts." Lori Greiner finally found her voice. "Mark, I had no idea about any of this. The CryptoGuard thing. Those families who lost money." "Lori, please," Cuban said weakly, but she cut him off. "No, this is serious. We're supposed to be inspiring entrepreneurs, helping people build businesses. If what she's saying is true, then..." She trailed off, shaking her head in disgust. Robert Herjavec, usually the diplomatic one, looked directly at Cuban. "Mate, you need to address this. These aren't just accusations, if there are SEC filings." But Cuban was already standing up, removing his microphone. "I'm not doing this. This was supposed to be about policy, not a personal attack." Crockett's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Personal attack? You spent 10 minutes questioning my right to exist in this space, and now you want to cry about personal attacks?" As Cuban stormed off the set, the cameras kept rolling. The remaining sharks sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The man who had been the face of their show for over a decade had just been completely destroyed on national television. But the real explosion was just beginning. Within minutes of the show's taping, clips began leaking on social media. A production assistant, clearly sympathetic to Crockett, had already uploaded the key moments to Twitter. The hashtag number Crockett Destroys Markin began trending before the show even finished taping. The clip of Crockett revealing Cuban's CryptoGuard involvement hit over 100,000 views in the first hour. The moment where she talked about Maria Gonzalez and James Wilson, the ordinary investors who lost everything, was being shared across every platform. Conservative accounts, usually critical of Crockett, found themselves in the awkward position of praising her destruction of a billionaire elite. Liberal accounts treated it like Christmas morning. Even normally apolitical business accounts were sharing the clips with comments like, "Holy shit, she came prepared," and "Never seen anyone dismantle Cuban like that." The business media picked up the story immediately. CNBC ran a breaking news segment titled, "Mark Cuban Faces Explosive Allegations on Shark Tank." Bloomberg published an article within 2 hours. Cuban's CryptoGuard investment under scrutiny after television confrontation. But it was the personal stories that really caught fire. Maria Gonzalez, the San Antonio mother Crockett had mentioned, gave an interview to local news that went viral. "I trusted him because he was Mark Cuban," she said through tears. "I thought someone that successful would never put regular people at risk." James Wilson from Detroit was even more direct. "That man destroyed my family's future, and then had the nerve to lecture a congresswoman about qualifications? She said everything I've wanted to say to him for months." The financial implications for Cuban were immediate and devastating. The Dallas Mavericks board called an emergency meeting. Sponsors began questioning their associations with Cuban. 3 separate investment firms announced they were reviewing their partnerships with his ventures. Shark Tank faced its own crisis. Fans were demanding Cuban's removal from the show. Number Fire Mark Cuban joined number Crockett Destroys Markin as trending topics. ABC executives found themselves in emergency meetings. trying to figure out how to handle their biggest star being exposed as a fraud on their own network. The other sharks scrambled to distance themselves. O'Leary released a statement saying he had no knowledge of Mr. Cuban's investment practices and would not have supported his comments if I had known the full context. Lori Greiner tweeted her support for honest business practices and treating all entrepreneurs with respect. But the most telling reactions came from the business world Cuban had dominated for so long. Other billionaires, who had always treated Cuban as one of their own, suddenly had nothing to say. Venture capital firms quietly removed his name from partnership announcements. The tech conference circuit, where Cuban had been a regular keynote speaker, went silent. For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath was the opposite. Her congressional approval ratings, already strong in her district, skyrocketed nationwide. Donations to her campaign fund poured in from across the country. Speaking requests flooded her office. She did what we've all wanted to do. Wrote a viral Twitter thread that got 2 million likes. Take one of these billionaire bullies and show America who they really are. Progressive groups hailed her as a new champion. This is what real accountability looks like, said a statement from Fight for $15. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself. She defended every working person who's been exploited by people like Mark Cuban. But perhaps the most important impact was on Cuban himself. 3 days after the show aired, he released a statement announcing he was taking time to reflect and stepping back from public appearances. The Mavericks announced he would have a reduced role in day-to-day operations. Industry insiders reported that Cuban was facing a full SEC investigation into his CryptoGuard activities. Class action lawsuits from the platform's investors were being filed in multiple states. His net worth, built on decades of careful image management, was crumbling as sponsors and partners fled. The man who had built his fortune on telling other people they weren't good enough was learning what happened when someone finally had the receipts to prove he wasn't either. 1 week after the confrontation, Crockett appeared on CNN to discuss the aftermath. "This wasn't about me versus Mark Cuban," she said calmly. "This was about holding powerful people accountable when they abuse that power. Too many billionaires think their money makes them untouchable. I'm here to remind them that it doesn't." When asked if she felt bad about Cuban's downfall, Crockett's response was swift and uncompromising. "I feel bad for Maria Gonzalez. I feel bad for James Wilson. I feel bad for every family that trusted Mark Cuban and lost everything because of his greed. Mark Cuban can afford good lawyers and multiple houses. His victims can't." The interviewer pressed. "Some people say you went too far, that this was character assassination." Crockett's smile was sharp and unapologetic. "Character assassination implies he had character to begin with. I just exposed who he really was. The only thing I assassinated was his ability to keep exploiting people without consequences." As the interview concluded, the host asked what was next for Crockett. "More of the same," she replied. "There are plenty of Mark Cubans out there who think their wealth makes them untouchable. My job is to prove them wrong." The message was clear. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just destroyed Mark Cuban. She had sent a warning to every powerful person who thought they could bully others without consequences. In a country tired of watching billionaires escape accountability, she had shown that the right person with the right information could bring down anyone. The age of untouchable billionaires was over. The age of accountability had begun. And it had all started with one congresswoman who refused to be intimidated by a man who thought his money made him untouchable. The ripple effects continued to spread far beyond entertainment and business. Law schools began using the confrontation as a case study in effective cross-examination techniques. Political science professors analyzed Crockett's strategy as a masterclass in preparation and execution under pressure. Young lawyers and politicians reached out to Crockett's office asking for advice on how to handle powerful opponents. "Know your facts. Document everything. And never let them see you sweat," became her standard response, though she always added, "And remember, bullies count on you being too intimidated to fight back. The moment you show you're not afraid, they crumble." The confrontation also sparked broader conversations about wealth inequality and accountability. Op-ed pieces appeared in major newspapers asking why it took a congresswoman ambushing a billionaire on reality television to expose behaviors that should have been investigated years earlier. Financial reform advocates used the Cuban takedown as proof that current regulations were inadequate. "If Jasmine Crockett can uncover this in preparation for a television show," wrote one economist, "what are our regulatory agencies actually doing?" The Securities and Exchange Commission faced intense pressure to explain how Cuban's alleged activities had gone undetected for so long. Congressional Republicans, normally protective of business interests, found themselves in the awkward position of demanding investigations into one of America's most visible entrepreneurs. The political implications were staggering. If a sitting congresswoman could expose this level of alleged fraud in preparation for a television appearance, what did that say about federal oversight? International media picked up the story as well. The BBC ran a segment titled American Dream or American Nightmare that used the confrontation to examine broader issues of wealth inequality in the United States. Financial news networks in London, Tokyo, and Frankfurt analyzed the implications for American markets and investor confidence. Cuban's international business ventures also came under scrutiny. Partners in Europe and Asia began questioning their associations with his various enterprises. A planned expansion of his investment portfolio into emerging markets was quietly shelved as foreign investors expressed concerns about due diligence and regulatory compliance. The confrontation had evolved from a television moment into a global conversation about accountability, regulation, and the responsibilities that come with extreme wealth. Crockett had unknowingly triggered an international examination of American business practices that would continue for months. Cuban himself seemed to understand that his era of public influence was over. 3 weeks after the confrontation, he sold his remaining stake in several public-facing ventures and retreated almost entirely from social media. The man who once seemed to have an opinion on everything went completely silent. What did you think of Jasmine Crockett's devastating takedown of Mark Cuban? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more explosive political confrontations that you won't see anywhere else. Who do you think should be held accountable next? Let us know, and we might just cover their downfall in our next video.